Jamal was a bright young boy with a smile that could light up any room. He lived in a small neighborhood surrounded by close-knit families who all shared similar backgrounds. He loved to read and was known for his love of words. His dream was to become a great speaker one day, someone who could inspire others with his voice. Jamal's family was supportive. His mom always told him that his voice was his power, that words could shape the world. He took that to heart. He practiced speaking at home, reading out loud, and imagining himself giving speeches to large audiences. But there was something different about Jamal. He had an accent that came from the community he grew up in. It was a part of him, a part of his culture. While he was proud of it, others at school didn't always understand. In class, Jamal would raise his hand to answer questions, but sometimes his classmates would giggle when he spoke. They mocked how he pronounced certain words. Jamal tried not to let it bother him, but deep down, it hurt. It made him question himself, and he started to doubt whether his voice was truly something worth sharing. Still, Jamal loved speaking. He knew his accent was part of his identity, but in a world where others didn't understand it, it often felt like something he had to hide. At school, Jamal tried his best to ignore the teasing. But it wasn't always easy. Every day, he'd sit in class, quietly listening as his classmates snickered when he spoke. It wasn't loud enough to be called out by the teacher, but it was there, a soft whisper behind his back. "What's he saying?" one of the kids would ask, making it obvious they didn't understand his accent. "I don't know, it sounds weird," another would respond, laughing along with the others. Jamal could feel their eyes on him, their smirks, their judgment. He wanted to sink into the floor, but instead, he'd force a smile, pretending it didn't bother him. He would continue, giving his answers, even if his voice cracked under the pressure. It didn't stop there. Sometimes, the kids would mimic his accent, repeating words in a mocking tone. They'd make faces, exaggerating the way he spoke, turning it into a joke. They didn't realize it, but their laughter cut deep. Jamal felt embarrassed, as if his very identity was something to be ashamed of. At first, he tried to talk louder, hoping his words would drown out the mocking. But that only seemed to make it worse. The teasing got more intense, and the whispers became louder. Jamal started to dread school. He began to question why his voice sounded different. Was something wrong with him? One day, during lunch, Jamal overheard a group of kids talking about him. "Did you hear Jamal? He's got the weirdest accent," one of them said. They all laughed again. Jamal felt his face turn red. He didn't want to hear it anymore. He just wanted to disappear. The teasing was becoming too much to bear, and he felt more isolated with every passing day. One afternoon, after a particularly rough day at school, Jamal stayed behind after class. Mrs. Williams, his teacher, had noticed that something seemed off. She had seen the way Jamal had kept his head down during group work and the way he hesitated to speak up in class. As the other students filed out of the room, Mrs. Williams walked over to Jamal, who was packing his books into his backpack slowly. She leaned down, her voice gentle. "Jamal, you don't have to be so quiet. What's on your mind?" Jamal didn't know what to say at first. He was used to keeping his feelings to himself. But Mrs. Williams had always been kind, and her face looked like she genuinely cared. He took a deep breath and spoke up. "They make fun of me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "because of how I talk. They laugh at my accent." Mrs. Williams listened carefully, nodding. She had noticed the teasing in class, but she had never thought it had affected Jamal so much. "You know," she said after a pause, "your accent is a part of who you are. It's what makes you unique, and that's something to be proud of, not something to hide." Jamal looked up at her, unsure. "But they don't like it. They laugh at me." Mrs. Williams smiled warmly. "They don't understand it, Jamal, but that's okay. You keep speaking just like you always do. You have a voice that matters." Jamal felt a little spark of hope. Mrs. Williams' words were simple, but they made him feel seen. He left class that day with a bit more confidence, carrying with him the belief that maybe, just maybe, his accent wasn't something to be ashamed of. The next morning, as Jamal sat at his desk, Mrs. Williams made an announcement to the class. Her voice was full of excitement, and she had a big smile on her face. "All right, everyone, listen up. The school is holding a speech contest next month, and I think it's the perfect opportunity for you all to showcase your talents." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. He loved the idea of speaking in front of others, but at the same time, the thought of standing in front of a crowd made his palms sweat. He remembered the teasing, the laughter. Could he really do it? Mrs. Williams continued. It's a chance for you to share something important to you. Don't worry about how you speak or what others might think. Just focus on your message and your passion. Jamal glanced around the room. Some of his classmates seemed excited, raising their hands immediately to volunteer. Others whispered among themselves, already thinking of what they could say. Jamal felt a wave of doubt, but something inside him also stirred. Maybe this could be his chance. Maybe, for once, he could speak without worrying about how others would react. Mrs. Williams noticed Jamal's hesitation and gave him an encouraging look. Jamal, I think you'd do a great job in the contest, she said gently. Jamal wasn't sure yet, but he decided he would give it a try. If he could speak in front of everyone, maybe he could finally start believing in himself. As the days passed, Jamal spent more and more time thinking about the speech contest. At first, the idea seemed exciting, but the closer the day came, the more nervous he became. His stomach churned at the thought of standing in front of everyone, speaking with his accent. Every time he practiced his speech at home, Jamal would pause, second-guessing himself. His words felt clumsy. His accent stood out to him more than ever. He would start over again, trying to hide it, trying to sound more normal, but each time, it didn't feel right. One evening, his mom walked in as he was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his notes. "What's wrong, Jamal?" she asked, noticing his frustration. "I don't think I can do it," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "What if they laugh at me again? What if my accent makes me sound silly?" His mom sat down beside him, looking at him with kind eyes. "Jamal, your accent is part of you. It's beautiful because it's yours. If you hide it, you're hiding a part of yourself. You have something special to share with others, and your voice matters." Jamal looked at his mom, but he still felt unsure. "But what if they don't understand me? What if they laugh?" His mom smiled softly. "Then you speak louder. You speak with confidence. The right people will listen and they will understand you." Jamal thought about her words long after she left the room. Slowly, he started to feel a bit more at peace with his accent. He realized his mom was right. His accent was part of who he was, and it didn't make him any less capable of speaking well. With that thought in mind, he began to practice again, this time feeling a little more confident with each word he spoke. The day of the speech contest finally arrived, and Jamal could hardly believe it. His nerves were at an all-time high. He woke up early, his stomach twisting in knots. He couldn't eat much for breakfast. The thought of standing in front of the entire school made him feel like he might faint. When he walked into school, he saw the other contestants practicing their speeches in the hallways. Some were confidently rehearsing their lines, while others were making last-minute adjustments. Jamal felt out of place. They all seemed so sure of themselves, but he still wasn't sure if he was ready. Mrs. Williams noticed his unease as he entered the classroom and gave him a reassuring smile. "You've got this, Jamal," she said. "Just remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about being yourself." That helped a little, but as the contest drew closer, Jamal's heart raced. The principal called all the contestants to the stage, and Jamal joined the line of kids waiting to speak. When his turn finally came, he felt like his legs were made of jelly. He could hear the murmurs from the audience as he stepped up to the microphone. He took a deep breath and began. His voice wavered slightly at first, but then, as he spoke, something changed. The words started to flow more easily. His accent, the one he had always been so self-conscious about, felt more natural now. He wasn't trying to hide it, he was embracing it. The audience was quiet, listening intently as Jamal continued. The more he spoke, the more confident he became. His speech wasn't perfect, but it felt genuine. He shared a story about his life, about his family, and about what his accent meant to him. He spoke with passion, and he felt proud of every word that came out of his mouth. By the time he finished, his heart was still pounding, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. The room was silent for a moment before the applause began. Jamal smiled, a wave of relief washing over him. He had done it. After Jamal finished his speech, the room seemed to pause. For a brief moment, there was silence. His heart raced as he stood there, waiting for some sort of reaction. Was it good? Was it terrible? He couldn't tell. His palms were sweaty, and he felt his legs shaking beneath him. And then, it happened. A loud round of applause erupted from the audience. Jamal blinked, surprised. The sound was warm and genuine, like the entire room was proud of him. For the first time that day, Jamal felt a sense of pride in himself. He hadn't won the contest, but that didn't matter. The applause wasn't just about winning. It was about the courage he had shown. It was about standing up and speaking his truth, even when he felt nervous and unsure. Jamal realized that he had done something more important than winning. He had found his voice, and he had shared it with others. The other contestants took their turns, but Jamal's performance had already left an impression. After the contest, some of the kids who had mocked him before came up to him. "Hey Jamal, that was actually really good," one of them said, nodding with respect. Another smiled. "I didn't know you could speak like that. You were amazing." Jamal's heart swelled a little. It felt strange, but it was also a relief. He hadn't expected this kind of response. He had spent so long doubting himself, but now it seemed that others were beginning to see him in a different light. He didn't win the contest, but in that moment, Jamal felt like he had won something far more important. He had earned respect, not just from others but from himself. After the contest, something shifted. The teasing stopped. Jamal could walk through the halls without hearing the whispers or the mocking laughter. His classmates, who once made fun of his accent, now treated him differently. They didn't just see him as the kid with the weird way of speaking anymore. They saw him as someone with something important to say. It wasn't just the kids who had teased him. Even the ones who had always been quiet now seemed to take notice. Some of them came up to him during lunch or after class, asking him how he had the confidence to speak in front of so many people. They were curious about how he had done it. One day, a boy named Alex, who had often laughed at Jamal's accent, approached him with a shy smile. "Hey Jamal, I've been thinking about what you said in your speech," he said. "I didn't really get it before, but now I see what you meant. You should really teach me how to speak like you, with that much confidence." Jamal was taken aback. "You want me to teach you?" he asked, surprised. Alex nodded. "Yeah, you made me realize it's not about how you sound, it's about what you say. I want to learn how to be as confident as you were up there." For the first time, Jamal felt a sense of pride in his accent. It was no longer something he tried to hide. His classmates were beginning to understand that it wasn't the way he spoke that mattered. It was the way he used his voice to share his ideas, his story, and his truth. As the weeks went by, Jamal's confidence grew. He became a role model for others, showing them that their voices, no matter how different, were worth hearing.